The morning sun peeked through the clouds as Elise Montgomery drove her blue Honda Accord down Oak Ridge Avenue. The trees lining the street swayed gently in the spring breeze, their shadows dancing across her windshield. Despite being worth over $2 billion, Elise preferred driving herself rather than hiring a driver. It kept her connected to reality, she always said. Elise had built Montgomery Technologies from nothing, turning her small tech startup into one of the most successful companies in the country. But today, she wasn't thinking about business meetings or quarterly reports. She was scouting locations for a new community center she wanted to fund, a place where kids could learn coding, robotics, and other tech skills for free. The Westview neighborhood was perfect, close to several schools that lacked proper funding for tech programs. As she drove slowly down the tree-lined street, Elise made mental notes about potential buildings and spaces. Her phone buzzed in the cup holder. The caller ID showed it was Thomas, her chief financial officer. "I should take this," she murmured to herself, pulling over to the curb in front of a row of elegant brick houses. She put the car in park and picked up the call. "Thomas, good timing. I'm actually looking at some spots in Westview right now." As Thomas talked about budget allocations for the new center, Elise noticed a police car pulling up behind her in the rearview mirror. She didn't think much of it. She was legally parked after all. "Hold on a second, Thomas," she said, watching as an officer stepped out of the patrol car. "There's a police officer approaching. Let me see what he wants." The officer was tall with a rigid posture that suggested military background. His name badge read, Reynolds. His hand rested casually on his belt as he approached her window. Elise rolled down her window and offered a friendly smile. "Good morning, officer. Is everything okay?" Officer Reynolds didn't return the smile. His eyes narrowed as he looked at her, then scanned the inside of her modest car. "License and registration," he said, his voice flat and cold. "No greeting, no explanation?" "Of course," Elise replied, keeping her tone pleasant. She reached for her purse in the passenger seat. "May I ask what this is about?" "I'm just taking a business call. I made sure to pull over properly." "We've had reports of suspicious activity in the area," Reynolds said, watching her movements closely. "This is a private neighborhood." "Do you live here?" Elise handed him her driver's license and registration. "No, I don't. I'm looking at locations for a community center my company is planning to build nearby." Reynolds studied her license, looking back and forth between the photo and her face several times. His expression changed slightly, a flicker of surprise quickly replaced by skepticism. "Montgomery Technologies?" "You're claiming to be that Montgomery?" The way he emphasized that made it clear he didn't believe her. "Yes, I'm the founder and CEO," Elise replied calmly. She was used to this reaction. People rarely expected a black woman in casual clothes driving an average car to be one of the wealthiest tech entrepreneurs in the country. "I can show you my business card and company ID if that helps." Reynolds handed back her license and registration with a dismissive flick of his wrist. "Look, Ms. Montgomery, if that's really who you are, this neighborhood isn't the place for loitering. The residents here value their privacy and security." Elise felt a familiar knot forming in her stomach, the same feeling she'd experienced countless times throughout her life, even as her wealth and status grew. But she kept her composure, the way she always did in uncomfortable situations. "Officer Reynolds, I understand your concern for the neighborhood, but I'm not loitering. I pulled over to take an important business call, which is the safe and legal thing to do. I'll be moving along as soon as my call is finished." She gestured to her phone where Thomas was still waiting. "My CFO is on the line right now to discuss the community center project." Reynolds leaned down, bringing his face closer to the window. "Let me be clear. People like you don't have business in this neighborhood unless you're working for one of the homeowners. I'm going to need you to move along now." The implication of people like you hung in the air between them. Elise had heard those words too many times not to understand their meaning. "Officer, I have every right to be here on a public street. I'm conducting legitimate business and breaking no laws." Her voice remained steady, though she could feel her heart rate increasing. "I'd be happy to explain the community center project to you. It will bring educational opportunities to kids in the surrounding areas." Reynolds straightened up, his hand shifting to rest on his holster, a subtle but clear intimidation tactic. "Step out of the vehicle, please. May I ask why?" "I've provided my identification and explained my purpose here." Elise made sure to keep both hands visible on the steering wheel, painfully aware of how quickly situations like this could escalate. Step out of the vehicle now, Reynolds repeated, his tone harder. You're being uncooperative. Elise knew her rights, but she also knew the reality of the situation. With a deep breath, she told Thomas she would call him back, ended the call, and carefully stepped out of her car. The morning that had started so promisingly now took on a darker tone as she stood on the sidewalk. A couple of neighbors had come out onto their porches, watching the scene unfold but not intervening. "Officer Reynolds," she said, keeping her voice calm and clear so the onlookers could hear. "I want to understand what policy I violated by pulling over to take a phone call." "You fit the description of someone we've been looking for," Reynolds said vaguely. "There have been reports of people casing houses in the area." "What description exactly?" Elise asked, though she already knew the answer. Reynolds ignored her question. "What's your real purpose here? And don't give me that community center story. This neighborhood isn't zoned for that kind of development." "I'm aware of the zoning laws," Elise replied. "The center would be built in the commercially zoned area 3 blocks south. I'm surveying the whole neighborhood to understand traffic patterns and accessibility for local children." A woman across the street had taken out her phone and appeared to be recording the interaction. Elise took some comfort in that. Witnesses and documentation had become necessary safeguards. "Let me see your phone," Reynolds demanded suddenly. "My phone? Why?" Elise clutched her smartphone, the prototype of Montgomery Technology's latest model, not yet available to the public. "You could be taking pictures of houses for criminal purposes." "Hand it over." "Officer, that's not a legal request. My phone contains confidential business information." Elise stood her ground. "If you have concerns, I'm happy to show you my recent calls to verify I was on a business call, but I cannot hand over my device without a warrant." Reynolds's face hardened. "That's it. You're being detained for interfering with an investigation." He reached for his handcuffs. At that moment, Elise decided to call her attorney. "I'm going to make a call to my lawyer now, Officer Reynolds." "I'm reaching for my phone slowly." She maintained eye contact as she carefully raised her phone. Reynolds swiftly grabbed her wrist. "Put that down." "You're not calling anyone." "This is my legal right," Elise stated firmly, trying to keep the situation from escalating while standing her ground. More neighbors had gathered now. An older man with silver hair stepped out from a Tudor-style house across the street, watching intently. A young couple with a baby stroller slowed their walk to observe. Reynolds tightened his grip on Elise's wrist until she winced and released her phone. He caught it before it hit the ground. "This is police property now," he said, pocketing her phone. "You can collect it at the station after we've completed our investigation." "Officer Reynolds," Elise said, her voice raised enough for the growing audience to hear. "I am Elise Montgomery, CEO of Montgomery Technologies. You have no legal grounds to detain me or confiscate my property. I want your badge number and your supervisor's contact information immediately." For a split second, doubt crossed Reynolds's face, but it quickly disappeared. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back," he ordered. "Am I under arrest? If so, for what crime?" Elise stood firm, knowing that compliance without clarity could be dangerous. "Trespassing, disturbing the peace, and resisting an officer," Reynolds rattled off. Though all 3 charges were clearly fabricated, a middle-aged woman in a jogging suit had stopped nearby and was openly filming now. "I'm recording this," she called out. "Just so everyone knows." Reynolds glanced at the woman, then back at Elise. Something in his demeanor shifted. The presence of recordings often had that effect. He reached for his radio. "I need backup at 1420 Oak Ridge Avenue. Got a trespasser refusing to comply." Elise saw an opportunity in his momentary distraction and raised her voice to address the onlookers. "My name is Elise Montgomery. I'm being detained without cause while looking at locations for a children's community center. Would someone please contact the police department's community relations office?" Reynolds grabbed her arm roughly. "That's enough. You're causing a disturbance." "I'm exercising my First Amendment rights," Elise replied, wincing at his grip but refusing to be silenced. More people had gathered now. Phones were out recording the scene. Reynolds seemed to realize that the situation was spinning beyond his control. He released her arm but stood blocking her path to her car. "You're getting a citation for illegal parking and disturbing the peace. Then you're going to leave this neighborhood and not come back without proper authorization." "Illegal parking? I pulled over legally to take a phone call." Elise rubbed her wrist where his grip had left red marks. "And I have every right to be on a public street." Reynolds began writing on his citation pad, his movements stiff with anger. The radio on his shoulder crackled with a response about backup being en route. The gathering crowd had grown to about a dozen people now. Most watched silently. Some whispered to each other, a few continued filming. Not one had stepped forward to intervene, except for one person. From across the street, the silver-haired man who had been watching from his Tudor home began making his way toward them, moving slowly but deliberately with the help of a handsome wooden cane. Elise didn't know it yet, but this elderly gentleman would change the course of her morning, and much more, in ways she couldn't imagine. Reynolds finished writing the citation and thrust it toward Elise. "Sign here. This isn't an admission of guilt, just acknowledgement that you received it." Elise took the paper but didn't sign immediately. She read over the fabricated charges, documenting each falsehood mentally for the complaint she would file later. "I'm not letting you back in that car," Reynolds said. "Call someone to pick you up after I leave or walk out of the neighborhood. Your vehicle will be towed if it's still here in 30 minutes. The silver-haired man was getting closer now, his expression determined. Reynolds hadn't noticed him yet, focused as he was on intimidating Elise. "Officer," Elise said firmly, "you have no grounds to prevent me from using my vehicle. I've broken no laws. Try to get in that car, and I'll arrest you for real," Reynolds threatened, his hand going to his handcuffs again. The elderly man was just a few steps away now, his presence still unnoticed by the officer. His face showed a mixture of concern and determination as he approached the escalating confrontation. The silver-haired man cleared his throat loudly as he approached, finally catching Officer Reynolds' attention. Both Elise and the officer turned to look at him. "Good morning," the man said, his voice steady and clear despite his age. "I couldn't help but notice what's happening here. Is everything all right?" Reynolds straightened his posture. "This is police business, sir. Please step back." The elderly man didn't move. Instead, he looked at Elise with kind eyes. "Are you okay, ma'am?" Before Elise could answer, Reynolds stepped between them. "Sir, I need you to return to your home. This situation is under control. My name is Walter Jenkins," the man said, ignoring Reynolds and extending his hand to Elise. "I live in the Tudor house across the street." Elise reached past Reynolds to shake Walter's hand. "Elise Montgomery, thank you for your concern." Reynolds put his hand on his holster again. "This is your final warning. Return to your home or I'll have to take action." Walter Jenkins stood his ground, surprising both Elise and Reynolds with his calmness. "Young man, I've been watching this interaction from my porch. I didn't see this lady doing anything wrong. In fact, she simply pulled over to take a phone call, which is what responsible drivers do. Mr. Jenkins, with all due respect, you don't understand the situation," Reynolds said, his voice tight with frustration. "Oh, I understand perfectly," Walter replied. "I may be old, but my eyes and ears work just fine." He turned to Elise. "Ms. Montgomery, did you say you're looking at sites for a community center?" Elise nodded, grateful for the unexpected support. "Yes, my company is planning to build a technology center for underprivileged children. I was surveying the area when I stopped to take a call from my CFO. Walter's face brightened. "That's wonderful. We need more programs like that. The schools in the surrounding neighborhoods are desperately underfunded." Reynolds cut in. "Sir, this woman has no business in this neighborhood. I've issued her a citation and she needs to leave." Walter's expression hardened. "Citation for what exactly, officer? Taking a phone call while properly parked? Or is there another reason you're treating her this way?" The implication hung in the air. Several onlookers murmured among themselves. More phones were raised, recording the confrontation. Reynolds' face flushed. "I don't appreciate what you're suggesting. And I don't appreciate watching a citizen being harassed for no good reason," Walter replied. He turned to address the growing crowd.
"Has anyone seen this woman doing anything suspicious?"
"Anything at all?" Silence fell over the group. A few people shook their heads. "That's what I thought," Walter said. He turned back to Reynolds. "Officer, I believe you owe Ms. Montgomery an apology." Reynolds' radio crackled. "Unit 34, what's your status? Backup is 2 minutes out." "Situation under control," Reynolds replied into his shoulder mic, though his tight expression suggested otherwise. "Cancel backup," Elise spoke up. "Officer Reynolds, I understand you're doing your job, but I still don't know what policy I've violated. I'd like my phone back, please." Reynolds hesitated, looking at the growing crowd, all potential witnesses. The situation had shifted from a routine stop to something much more complicated. "Your phone will be returned when I've finished my investigation," Reynolds said, doubling down despite the changing dynamics. Walter shook his head disapprovingly. "Officer, you can't just take someone's property without cause. That phone belongs to Ms. Montgomery. Stay out of this," Reynolds snapped at Walter. "I'm afraid I can't do that," Walter said calmly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his own phone. "I think it's time I made a call of my own." "Who are you calling?" Reynolds asked, suddenly wary. "An old friend," Walter replied, scrolling through his contacts. "Police Chief Howard Wilson. He clerked for me back when I was on the state Supreme Court." Reynolds froze, his expression changing from irritation to alarm. "You're Judge Jenkins?" "Retired Judge Jenkins," Walter corrected with a small smile. "But Chief Wilson and I still play golf every Thursday." He found the contact and pressed the call button, putting the phone on speaker. After 2 rings, a deep voice answered. "Walter, what a surprise to hear from you on a Tuesday. Everything okay?" "Good morning, Howard," Walter replied pleasantly. "I wish I was calling under better circumstances." "I'm standing on Oak Ridge Avenue watching one of your officers, a James Reynolds, detaining a woman for taking a business call in her parked car. He's confiscated her phone and written her a citation for, as far as I can tell, driving while black." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. "Could you repeat the officer's name?" "James Reynolds, badge number 4872, Walter said, reading from Reynolds' nameplate. Reynolds' face had drained of color. He shifted uncomfortably, his hand dropping away from his holster. "Walter, are you in any danger?" Chief Wilson asked, his voice now serious. "Not at all," Walter assured him. "Just witnessing something that I believe requires your attention." "Put the officer on the phone, please," Chief Wilson requested. Walter held the phone out to Reynolds, who hesitated before taking it. He turned away from the crowd and spoke quietly into the phone, his shoulders growing increasingly tense with each passing moment. Elise looked at Walter gratefully. "Thank you for stepping in, Your Honor. Not many people would have gotten involved." Walter waved away her thanks. "Please call me Walter. And I couldn't just watch from my porch. What kind of person would that make me?" He glanced at the silent bystanders with disappointment in his eyes. Reynolds finished his conversation and handed the phone back to Walter, his expression unreadable. "The chief would like to speak with you again," Reynolds said stiffly. Walter took the phone. "Yes, Howard? I'm on my way there now," Chief Wilson said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Should be about 15 minutes. Please stay there with the woman if you can." "Of course," Walter agreed. "We'll be waiting." The call ended and Walter pocketed his phone. Reynolds stood awkwardly, avoiding eye contact with everyone. "It seems we have a few minutes to wait," Walter said conversationally, as if they were all just waiting for a bus. "Ms. Montgomery, why don't you tell me more about this community center you're planning?" Elise, still processing the sudden turn of events, nodded. "It will be a place where kids can learn coding, robotics, and other tech skills after school and on weekends. All free of charge." "That sounds wonderful," Walter said, genuinely interested. "We need more of that kind of investment in our communities." Reynolds cleared his throat. "Ms. Montgomery, I'm returning your property." He held out her phone, his earlier aggression replaced by stiff professionalism. Elise took her phone back. "Thank you, officer." The crowd had thinned somewhat, but several people remained, curious to see how the situation would resolve. The young couple with the stroller had moved closer, and the woman who had first started recording was still there, her phone still pointed at the scene. "I'm going to call my legal team," Elise said, unlocking her phone. "They should be here when the chief arrives." Reynolds shifted uncomfortably. "That won't be necessary. I'm withdrawing the citation." "I appreciate that," Elise replied, "but I still intend to have representation present." She dialed a number and stepped a few paces away to speak privately. Walter watched her with admiration, then turned to Reynolds. "You know, officer, we all make mistakes. The true measure of a person is how they handle those mistakes once they realize them." Reynolds said nothing, his jaw tight. "I don't want to see you lose your job," Walter continued, his voice low enough that only Reynolds could hear. "But I do want you to think about your actions today and ask yourself some hard questions." Elise returned from her call. "My legal team will be here in 10 minutes. Walter nodded approvingly. "Good. Now, would either of you like some water while we wait?" It's getting rather warm out here. He gestured toward his house across the street. That's very kind, but I'm fine, Elise said with a small smile. Reynolds shook his head stiffly. Walter shrugged. Well, the offer stands if you change your minds. The next few minutes passed in uncomfortable silence. Reynolds remained standing by his patrol car, occasionally speaking quietly into his radio. Elise and Walter moved to stand in the shade of a large oak tree. I hope this incident doesn't color your view of our neighborhood, Walter said. Most of us aren't like, well, he nodded discreetly toward Reynolds. I understand, Elise replied. One person doesn't represent everyone. Still, I'm disappointed that no one else stepped forward, Walter admitted, looking around at the houses where curious faces peeked from windows. Silence can be its own form of complicity. Elise nodded thoughtfully. That's true, but your action means more because it wasn't part of a crowd. You stood alone. A sleek black car pulled up behind. Elise's Honda. Two professionally dressed people emerged. A tall man with glasses and a woman carrying a leather briefcase. There's my legal team, Elise said, waving them over. Almost simultaneously, a police SUV with official markings pulled up. A broad-shouldered man in a crisp police uniform stepped out. Chief Howard Wilson had arrived. Walter smiled. And here comes Howard, right on time. The chief approached their small group with quick, purposeful strides. He nodded respectfully to Walter, then turned to Elise. Ms. Montgomery, I'm Chief Wilson. I want to personally apologize for any inconvenience or distress you've experienced today. Elise's lawyers joined the circle, standing protectively on either side of her. Thank you, Chief Wilson, Elise replied. I appreciate your quick response to the situation. The chief turned to Reynolds, who had straightened to attention. Officer Reynolds, report back to the station immediately. Lieutenant Barnes will take your statement. Reynolds nodded stiffly. Yes, sir. He got into his patrol car without another word and drove away. Chief Wilson turned back to Elise and Walter. Now I'd like to get full statements from both of you about what happened here today. Elise gestured to her attorneys. My legal team is prepared to provide a detailed account. Excellent, the chief said. He looked at the remaining onlookers. If anyone else witnessed this incident and is willing to provide a statement, please speak with one of my officers. He gestured to another police car that had just arrived. Walter placed a hand gently on Elise's shoulder. Are you okay, really? Elise took a deep breath, the adrenaline of the confrontation finally wearing off. I am now, thanks to you. Not everyone would have had the courage to step in like that. It wasn't courage, Walter said quietly. It was simply the right thing to do. He looked at her thoughtfully. You know, I'd be very interested in hearing more about that community center of yours. Perhaps over coffee sometime? Elise smiled, the first genuine smile since the ordeal began. I'd like that very much, Walter. I'd like that very much indeed. 3 days had passed since the incident on Oak Ridge Avenue. Elise sat in her spacious office at Montgomery Technologies headquarters, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city skyline. The morning sun cast long shadows across her desk, where several newspapers lay open to articles about what had happened. Local tech billionaire racially profiled, read one headline. Another declared, retired judge stands up to police harassment. The stories had spread quickly, first on social media through witness videos, then to local news, and finally to national outlets. Elise sighed and turned away from the papers. She hadn't wanted this kind of attention. Her focus had always been her work and the positive impact she could make through technology and education. Now she had become the center of a different kind of story. A soft knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. Come in, she called. Thomas, her CFO, entered with a tablet in hand. He was a thin man with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Morning, Elise. How are you holding up? Elise gave him a small smile. I'm okay. Just thinking about how quickly things can change. She gestured to the newspapers. This wasn't exactly the publicity I was looking for when we started planning the community center. Thomas nodded sympathetically. I know, but maybe it can be used for good. He set the tablet on her desk and pulled up a graph. Donations to the Montgomery Foundation have increased by 300% since the story broke. People want to support your vision now more than ever. Elise looked at the numbers, surprised. Really, that's unexpected. It shouldn't be, Thomas said. You've built your reputation on integrity and giving back. This incident just reminded people why they believe in you. Elise's assistant buzzed through on the intercom. Ms. Montgomery? Judge Jenkins is here to see you. A warm smile spread across Elise's face. Send him in, please. She turned to Thomas. We'll continue this later? Thomas nodded and gathered his tablet. As he reached the door, Walter Jenkins entered, leaning lightly on his wooden cane. Thomas shook the older man's hand before leaving them alone. Walter, this is a nice surprise, Elise said, coming around her desk to greet him. Walter smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Not at all, Elise assured him, guiding him to a comfortable seating area by the windows. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Tea? Coffee would be wonderful, thank you, Walter replied, easing himself onto the sofa. Elise pressed a button on the intercom and requested 2 coffees before sitting across from Walter. I've been meaning to call you. Things have been a bit hectic with all the media attention. Walter nodded understandingly. That's partly why I came. I wanted to see how you were doing. These public storms can be overwhelming, even for someone as accomplished as yourself. Elise appreciated his concern. In the short time they'd known each other, Walter had shown himself to be genuinely thoughtful. I'm managing. It helps to focus on the work. Speaking of which, I've made progress on the community center plans. Would you like to see? Walter's face brightened. Very much so. Elise pulled up digital renderings on a large screen on the wall. The plans showed a modern building with open, welcoming spaces filled with technology. It's beautiful, Walter said, studying the images. Where will it be built? That's actually another reason I wanted to talk to you, Elise replied. I've found the perfect location just 3 blocks south of your home, in the commercially zoned area we discussed. It used to be a warehouse, but it's been empty for years. A knock at the door announced the arrival of their coffee. Elise's assistant brought in a tray with 2 steaming mugs and a small plate of cookies before quietly excusing herself. Walter took a sip of his coffee. Perfect, he murmured appreciatively. Almost as good as mine. A twinkle in his eye suggested friendly competition. Elise laughed. You'll have to have me over for coffee sometime so I can be the judge of that. It would be my pleasure, Walter said. His expression grew more serious. But first, there's another reason for my visit. Have you heard about the police department's internal investigation? Elise's smile faded. Only what my lawyers have told me. They've been handling most of it. Walter set down his coffee cup. Chief Wilson called me this morning. They've completed their preliminary investigation into Officer Reynolds. Apparently, there have been 3 previous complaints against him for similar behavior. 3? Elise wasn't entirely surprised, but the confirmation was still troubling. Walter nodded gravely. Yes, none resulted in disciplinary action. The victims either gave up or settled quietly. Your case is different because of the video evidence and, frankly, your resources to pursue it. Elise considered this. What happens now? Reynolds has been suspended without pay pending a full hearing next week. The chief wanted me to tell you that they're taking this very seriously. Walter paused. He also mentioned that several other officers are being investigated for failing to properly address the previous complaints. Elise stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. You know, Walter, I never wanted to be the face of police reform. I build technology. I create educational opportunities. That's what I know. Walter joined her at the window, standing beside her in companionable silence for a moment. Sometimes we don't choose our platforms. They choose us. Elise turned to look at him. What would you do if you were in my position? I can't answer that, Walter replied honestly. But I can tell you what I see when I look at you. I see someone with extraordinary influence who faces the same prejudices as people without your resources. The difference is you have the power to do something about it, not just for yourself but for all the people who don't have billionaire resources and retired judges as friends. Their conversation was interrupted by Elise's phone ringing. She glanced at it and frowned. I'm sorry, it's the mayor. I should take this, Walter nodded. Of course. Elise answered the call, putting it on speaker out of respect for Walter's presence. Mayor Bennett, good morning. Ms. Montgomery. The mayor's voice was warm and enthusiastic. I've been trying to reach you. How are you doing after that unfortunate incident? I'm well, thank you, Elise replied, her tone professional. Excellent, excellent. Listen, I'd like to invite you to a special city council meeting tomorrow. We're discussing police reform measures, and your perspective would be invaluable. Elise raised an eyebrow at Walter, who remained silent but attentive. That's very kind, Mayor, but I'm not a policy expert. Nonsense. You're exactly who we need. Your experience combined with your standing in the community, it would send a powerful message. And frankly, the mayor lowered his voice slightly, it would look good for both of us. Election year, you know. Elise's expression cooled. I see. So you'll come? The mayor pressed. I'll consider it, Elise replied carefully. My schedule is quite full, but I appreciate the invitation. After a few more pleasantries, Elise ended the call and looked at Walter with a mixture of amusement and frustration. And so it begins. The politicians wanting to use this situation. Walter chuckled softly. Bennett always was an opportunist. I've known him since he was a junior councilman. Elise returned to her seat. What would you advise? Should I attend the council meeting? Only if you have something you want to say, Walter replied thoughtfully. Don't let others set your agenda. This is your story to tell, your platform to use as you see fit. Elise nodded, appreciating his wisdom. I've been thinking about that. Maybe there is a way to use this attention constructively. She picked up her tablet and opened a document. I've been drafting something. A proposal for a different kind of community program, alongside the tech center. Walter leaned forward, interested. What kind of program? A partnership between law enforcement and the communities they serve. Training, yes, but also relationship building. Creating spaces where police and citizens can interact outside of crisis situations. Elise's voice grew more animated as she described her vision. We could pilot it in this neighborhood, then expand if it works. Walter's eyes lit up. That's quite remarkable, Elise. Taking something negative and transforming it into something constructive. Do you think it could work? She asked. With your resources and determination? Absolutely, Walter smiled. And I might be able to help. I still have some influence with the police department and the judicial system. Elise felt a spark of excitement, the kind she usually experienced only when developing new technology. A partnership, then? I'd be honored, Walter said. He extended his hand and Elise shook it firmly. Just then, Elise's assistant knocked and entered, looking apologetic. I'm sorry to interrupt, Ms. Montgomery, but you have a call from the National News Network. They want to schedule an interview about the incident. Elise and Walter exchanged looks. Thank you, Claire. Tell them I'll call back later. After her assistant left, Elise sighed. Everyone wants a piece of this story. The question is, Walter said gently, what story do you want to tell? Elise thought for a moment. Not one of victimhood. Not one of anger, though I certainly felt that. I want to tell a story of change, of progress. She paused. But I won't pretend it's easy or that one incident and some goodwill can fix systemic problems. Walter nodded approvingly. Honest and hopeful. The best kind of story. Elise smiled at him, grateful for his understanding. Will you help me tell it? Not just to the media, but to the people who can actually make changes. Every step of the way, Walter promised. He glanced at his watch. Speaking of steps, I should get going. I have a lunch meeting with Howard, Chief Wilson. Would you like to join us? It might be a good opportunity to discuss your partnership idea informally. Elise considered the invitation. I think that would be perfect, actually. She picked up her phone. Let me just reschedule a few things. As she made quick work of clearing her afternoon schedule, Elise felt a newfound sense of purpose. The incident with Officer Reynolds had been frightening and infuriating, but perhaps some good could come from it after all. Ready? She announced, gathering her purse. Where are we meeting him? Little place called Giovanni's downtown, Walter replied, standing up with the help of his cane. Best Italian food in the city, and the private back room is perfect for discussions that require discretion. As they walked toward the elevator together, Elise realized something. You planned this, didn't you? The lunch with Chief Wilson? Walter's eyes twinkled mischievously. Let's just say I had a feeling you might have some ideas worth sharing. Was I wrong? Elise laughed, shaking her head. Not at all. In fact, your timing is impeccable. One of the advantages of age, my dear, Walter said as they stepped into the elevator. You develop a sense for when the moment is right. The elevator doors closed on their smiling faces. An unlikely friendship forged in difficult circumstances, now growing into something that might just change their community for the better. The private dining room at Giovanni's restaurant hummed with conversation. Elise sat across from Police Chief Howard Wilson with Walter at the head of the table. The remains of their lunch, half-eaten tiramisu and coffee cups scattered between them. Large windows overlooked the city park, bathing the room in natural light. "So let me make sure I understand," Chief Wilson said, reviewing the notes he'd taken. "You're proposing a 3-part initiative: community engagement programs, officer training reform, and a civilian oversight committee with actual teeth." Elise nodded. "Yes, but all connected through a central philosophy: rebuilding trust through genuine relationships and accountability." The chief leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. He was younger than Walter but older than Elise, with salt and pepper hair and the weathered face of someone who'd seen both the best and worst of humanity. "It's ambitious," he said finally. "Some of my officers will resist, especially the oversight piece. That's why implementation needs to be gradual but firm," Walter added. "Start with the community engagement. That's the easiest sell. Use that momentum to introduce the training reforms. The oversight committee comes last after you've built some goodwill." Chief Wilson tapped his pen against his notepad. "The timing is good, I'll grant you that. Public opinion is on your side right now, Ms. Montgomery. And the mayor is looking for a win before the election." "I'm not interested in being anyone's political trophy," Elise said firmly. "This isn't about optics or elections. It's about creating lasting change." The chief smiled slightly.
I believe you.
"But the reality is we need political support to make these changes stick. The mayor's self-interest might actually work in our favor for once." Walter chuckled. Howard always was pragmatic even as a young clerk. Elise considered this. "Fair point. But I want to be clear. This isn't just a reaction to what happened to me. Officer Reynolds's behavior was wrong, but he's a symptom of deeper problems, not the cause." "Agreed," the chief said, surprising her. "Look, I've been trying to push reforms for years, but change comes slowly in institutions like ours. Sometimes it takes a catalyst." He gestured toward Elise. "Your situation has created an opening. I'd be a fool not to use it." Walter smiled approvingly at his former clerk. "So you're on board?" "Conditionally," the chief replied. "I need to bring my command staff into the discussion, and we'll need to work out the budget implications." He looked at Elise. "I assume Montgomery Technologies is prepared to provide some financial backing?" "Of course," Elise said. "I'm prepared to commit significant resources through our foundation. But this needs to be a true partnership, not just us throwing money at the problem." "Understood." The chief made another note. "There's one more thing we need to discuss. The disciplinary hearing for Officer Reynolds is scheduled for Monday." Elise tensed slightly. Walter placed a supportive hand on her arm. "What are you expecting to happen?" Elise asked. The chief set down his pen and folded his hands. "Based on the evidence and his prior complaints, termination is the likely outcome. But I wanted to ask if you plan to attend." Elise hadn't considered this. "Do you think I should?" "It would send a strong message," the chief said. "But I'll respect whatever you decide." Walter turned to Elise. "What do you think, my dear?" "There's no right answer here." Elise took a moment to consider. "If I attend, it becomes more about me versus Reynolds, rather than about addressing the systemic issues. But if I don't go, it might seem like I don't care about the outcome." "There's a third option," the chief suggested. "Submit a written statement to be read during the proceedings. Make it about the bigger picture, not just your individual experience." Elise's face brightened. "I like that approach. It allows me to have a voice without making it personal." "I'd be happy to help you draft it," Walter offered. "Thank you, both of you." Elise looked between the two men, feeling genuinely grateful for their support and guidance. The chief checked his watch. "I should get back to the station." "Can we meet again later this week?" "I'd like to bring my deputy chiefs into the conversation." "Absolutely," Elise replied. "My assistant will coordinate with your office." They all stood, shaking hands before the chief departed, leaving Walter and Elise alone in the private dining room. "Well," Walter said with a satisfied smile, "I'd say that went rather well." Elise nodded, gathering her things. "Better than I expected, honestly. I thought he'd be more defensive." "Howard's one of the good ones," Walter said. "Always has been. That's why I mentored him all those years ago." As they walked out of the restaurant together, a young woman approached them hesitantly. "Excuse me," she said. "Are you Elise Montgomery?" Elise nodded, used to being recognized, especially since the incident had made the news. The woman's eyes filled with tears. "I just wanted to say thank you. My brother was arrested last year in a similar situation. But no one believed him because there was no video. What you're doing matters. Before Elise could respond, the woman quickly walked away, disappearing into the lunchtime crowd. Walter glanced at Elise, noting her emotional reaction. You okay? Yes, Elise said softly. It's just, that's why this matters, isn't it? For all the people who don't have the resources or platform that I do. Walter nodded. Indeed. Now shall we head to the community center site? The architect is meeting us there at 2. The site of the future Montgomery Technology Center was a stark contrast to the elegant restaurant they'd just left. The abandoned warehouse stood in a neglected part of town, its brick walls covered in graffiti, broken windows patched with plywood. But Elise saw its potential. The architect, a young woman named Priya with bright eyes and innovative ideas, walked them through the space, pointing out where different features would go. The main coding lab here, robotics workshop there, and this area will be the community gathering space, she explained, gesturing enthusiastically. We're preserving as much of the original structure as possible. Sustainability and honoring the building's history are priorities. Walter watched Elise as she engaged with the architect, asking insightful questions and offering suggestions. Her passion was evident, her vision clear. What do you think about incorporating space for the police community initiative we discussed? Elise asked Priya. Nothing too official, just a comfortable area where officers and kids could interact in a positive environment. Priya considered this. We could adapt the community room design to accommodate that. Maybe add some flexible partitions for privacy when needed. Perfect, Elise agreed. I want it to feel organic, not forced. As they continued the tour, Walter found himself lagging slightly behind. His cane tapped against the concrete floor as he navigated around construction materials. Elise noticed and slowed her pace. Sorry, should we take a break? She asked with concern. Walter waved her off. I'm fine, just not as spry as I once was. Don't slow down on my account, Elise smiled. Actually, I could use a break myself. She turned to Priya. Could you give us a few minutes? Then we can continue upstairs. After the architect stepped away to take a phone call, Elise guided Walter to a makeshift seating area where some old crates had been repurposed as benches. You don't have to coddle me, Walter said, though he sat down gratefully. It's not coddling to respect each other's needs, Elise replied, sitting beside him. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, looking around the cavernous space. You know, Walter said finally, I've lived in this city for over 50 years, watched neighborhoods rise and fall. This area used to be the heart of manufacturing. Then it all moved overseas. These buildings have been empty for decades. Elise nodded. That's why this location matters. It's not just about teaching technology. It's about bringing opportunity back to a place that's been forgotten. Walter looked at her with admiration. You could have built this anywhere. Somewhere more convenient, more prestigious. What good would that do? Elise asked simply. The kids who need this most aren't in those areas. A commotion at the entrance caught their attention. Officer Reynolds stood in the doorway, looking around until his eyes landed on Elise and Walter. Elise tensed. Walter gripped his cane tighter. Reynolds approached slowly, his posture less confident than when they'd last seen him. He stopped a respectful distance away. Ms. Montgomery, he said, his voice subdued. Judge Jenkins, Walter nodded stiffly. Officer Reynolds, I wasn't aware you were invited to this meeting. I wasn't, Reynolds admitted. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to another. I'm not here officially. I'm on administrative leave pending my hearing. Then why are you here? Elise asked directly. Reynolds took a deep breath. I wanted to apologize in person. What I did was wrong. There's no excuse for it. Elise studied his face, searching for sincerity. What changed your mind? The videos? The public pressure? The threat to your job? All of that at first, Reynolds admitted with surprising honesty. But then I started really thinking about it. About all of it. The way I've been doing my job, the assumptions I make. He paused. My sergeant made me take an implicit bias course last year after a complaint. I went through the motions but didn't take it seriously. Now I'm actually listening to what they were trying to teach me. Walter and Elise exchanged glances. An apology is a start, Elise said carefully. But it's just that, a start. Reynolds nodded. I know. I don't expect forgiveness. I just thought, you deserve to hear it from me directly. He looked around at the warehouse. Is this the community center I heard about on the news? It will be, Elise confirmed. It's a good thing you're doing, Reynolds said. This neighborhood needs it. He hesitated. Look, I know I have no right to ask anything, but if there's ever any way I could contribute, maybe volunteer or something. If I still have a job, that is. The request surprised both Elise and Walter. That would depend on many things, Walter said, including the outcome of your hearing and your genuine commitment to change. Reynolds nodded. I understand. I'll leave you to your meeting. Thank you for hearing me out. He turned to go. Officer Reynolds, Elise called after him. He stopped and looked back. Everyone deserves a chance to learn from their mistakes. What matters is what you do next. Reynolds gave a small nod before walking away. Priya returned as Reynolds left. Is everything okay? Yes, Elise said, her expression thoughtful. Just an unexpected conversation. She stood, offering Walter a hand. Shall we continue the tour? As they climbed the stairs to view the upper level, Walter said quietly, That took courage. From both of you. Maybe, Elise replied. Or maybe it's just what happens when people start seeing each other as human beings instead of assumptions. The afternoon sun streamed through the warehouse's high windows, illuminating dust particles floating in the air like tiny stars. In this neglected building, something important was taking shape, not just a community center, but a new approach to old problems. Priya pointed out where the rooftop garden would be, explaining how it would collect rainwater for the building's use. Walter asked intelligent questions about accessibility features. Elise envisioned children filling these empty spaces, learning and growing. The future was uncertain. Officer Reynolds' hearing, the police reform initiative, the community's response to their plans, but for the first time since the incident on Oak Ridge Avenue, Elise felt genuinely hopeful. Sometimes change started with a confrontation, but it continued with conversation, commitment, and the courage to imagine something better. 6 months later, the transformed warehouse stood as a beacon in the neighborhood. The Montgomery Technology Center's grand opening was scheduled for the following week, but today the building hosted a different event, the first graduation ceremony for the Community Police Partnership Program. Elise stood at the edge of the stage set up in the main hall, watching as people filled the rows of chairs. Sunlight streamed through the newly installed skylights, highlighting the beautiful blend of modern technology and preserved historical architecture. The brick walls had been cleaned but left exposed, telling the story of the building's past while embracing its new purpose. Walter approached, looking distinguished in a tailored suit. His cane now sported a polished silver handle, a gift from Elise on his 79th birthday last month. Nervous? He asked, noting her tapping foot. Elise smiled. A little. It's one thing to plan a program like this, another to see if it actually makes a difference. 25 officers and 50 community members completing the first training cycle together is already a difference, Walter reminded her. Look at them. Elise followed his gaze to where the graduates mingled. Police officers in formal uniforms chatted with community members from various backgrounds. What struck her most was the body language, relaxed, open, engaged. These were not strangers eyeing each other suspiciously, but people who had spent 12 weeks learning together, sharing experiences, and building understanding. You're right, she admitted. I just hope it lasts beyond today. That's why the ongoing mentorship component is so crucial, Walter said. He pointed to a corner where a young officer was showing a teenager how to properly hold a basketball. Those relationships are the real success story. Chief Wilson joined them, looking pleased with the turnout. The mayor just arrived with 2 city council members and a state representative, he reported. Word is getting around about what we've built here. Politics, Walter muttered, though without real irritation. Necessary politics, the chief countered. We need their budget support to expand this program citywide. Elise checked her watch. We should get started soon. Is everyone here? The chief nodded. Just about. Oh, and Elise. Reynolds is here. Elise's expression remained neutral, but her eyes searched the crowd until she spotted him near the back. Former Officer Reynolds wore civilian clothes, a button-down shirt and slacks. His disciplinary hearing had resulted in termination as expected, but with a surprising twist. At Elise's suggestion, his separation agreement included a path to potential reinstatement after 2 years, Contingent on community service and completion of extensive training. Has he spoken to any of the graduates? She asked. A few, the chief replied. He's been volunteering here twice a week, mostly working with the maintenance team and the after-school program. Keeps a low profile but shows up consistently. Walter observed him from across the room. Redemption is a long road. Yes, Elise agreed. But at least he's walking it. A staff member approached to let them know everything was ready. Elise took a deep breath and moved to the podium as Walter and the chief took their seats on stage. The audience quieted as Elise adjusted the microphone. Camera crews from local news stations positioned themselves along the sides of the room. This story had maintained public interest, evolving from scandal to something more hopeful. Good afternoon, Elise began. 6 months ago, many of us in this room were strangers to each other. Some of us even had difficult first meetings. A knowing chuckle rippled through the audience. Today we gather not just as acquaintances, but as partners in a shared vision for our community. As Elise spoke about the journey that had brought them here, she couldn't help reflecting on her own path. The incident with Officer Reynolds had been painful and humiliating, but it had also opened doors that might have remained closed otherwise. Her partnership with Walter had blossomed into a deep friendship that bridged generations and backgrounds. The police department, under Chief Wilson's leadership, had embraced reforms that previously faced resistance. This program isn't about pretending that difficult histories don't exist, she continued. It's about acknowledging them honestly and still choosing to move forward together. The graduates you see today have spent hundreds of hours in dialogue, training, and community service. They've had conversations that were uncomfortable but necessary. They've learned to see beyond assumptions and stereotypes. She glanced at Walter, who gave her an encouraging nod. Before we present the certificates, I want to share something personal, Elise said, her voice softening. Many people have called me brave for speaking out after what happened to me. But true bravery isn't just standing up for yourself. It's standing up for a better way forward, even when that path is uncertain. She gestured to the diverse group of graduates. These individuals, both the officers and the community members, are demonstrating that kind of bravery. They're choosing connection over division, understanding over assumption, and growth over stagnation. That's why I'm so proud to introduce the first graduating class of the Community Police Partnership Program. The ceremony proceeded with each graduate receiving a certificate and a moment of recognition. The chief spoke about changes already implemented in police training. Walter shared his perspective on how community police relations had evolved over his lifetime. As the formal program concluded and people moved toward the reception area, Elise found herself approached by a young woman she recognized as one of the community graduates. Ms. Montgomery, the woman said, I wanted to thank you personally. My younger brother was the one who was arrested last year. I spoke to you briefly outside Giovanni's restaurant months ago. Elise remembered her. Of course. How is your brother doing? Much better, the woman replied with a smile. He's actually helping with the youth coding program here 2 evenings a week. And the officer who arrested him went through this partnership program too. She pointed to an officer across the room. They're not best friends or anything, but they can talk to each other now. That feels like a miracle to me. Elise was touched. That's exactly what we hoped for. After the woman moved on, Elise made her way through the crowd, stopping to chat with graduates and guests. She eventually found herself near the back of the room, where Reynolds stood somewhat apart from the others. He straightened when he saw her approach. Ms. Montgomery, congratulations on the program's success. Thank you, she replied. I understand you've been volunteering here. Reynolds nodded. Twice a week. I help maintain the building, and I've been assisting with the after-school sports program. He hesitated. I wanted to be useful without overstepping. Elise studied him. The arrogant officer who had harassed her that day on Oak Ridge Avenue seemed very different from the humbled man before her now. The tech center director mentions your work in the weekly reports, she said. The kids apparently enjoy the basketball coaching. A small smile crossed his face. They're good kids. Reminds me why I wanted to be an officer in the first place, to help communities, not police them. Elise nodded. There's an opening for a full-time youth sports coordinator starting next month. The director suggested you might be interested. Surprise crossed Reynolds' face. Are you serious? Even after everything that happened? The position reports to the community board, not directly to me, Elise clarified. You'd have to apply and interview like anyone else. But yes, I'm serious. Reynolds seemed genuinely moved. I don't know what to say except, thank you for the opportunity. Second chances matter, Elise said simply. What we do with them matters even more. She moved on before he could respond, making her way back toward the front where Walter was engaged in animated conversation with several graduates. He smiled as she joined them. Elise, perfect timing. These young people were just sharing their ideas for Phase 2 of the program. The discussion flowed easily, with officers and community members building on each other's suggestions. Watching them interact, Elise felt a deep satisfaction. This was what progress looked like. Not perfect, not complete, but real and ongoing. Later, as the event wound down, Elise and Walter stood by the large windows overlooking the neighborhood. The setting sun cast a golden glow over the streets. You know, Walter said thoughtfully, when I stepped in that day on Oak Ridge Avenue, I never imagined where it would lead. Neither did I, Elise admitted. I was just angry and hurt. Rightfully so, Walter affirmed. But you channeled those feelings into something constructive. Not everyone does that, Elise smiled. I had good help, partners, Walter corrected gently. We did this together, along with many others. They watched as the last of the guests departed, officers and community members walking out together, some exchanging phone numbers, others making plans for coffee or lunch. The real test comes now, Elise said, when the cameras are gone and the daily work continues. Walter placed a hand on her shoulder. That's true, but foundations matter and you've built a strong one. He gestured to the building around them, both literally and figuratively. We've built it, Elise corrected him with a smile. The center's staff began cleaning up, preparing the space for the next day's youth programs. Tomorrow, children would fill these rooms, learning coding and robotics in the very neighborhood many had written off as hopeless. Officers would drop by for mentoring sessions, building relationships beyond crises and confrontations. Chief Wilson joined them by the window. City Council unanimously approved funding to expand the program to 3 more districts, he announced. The mayor is suddenly our biggest champion, Walter chuckled. Amazing what good press can do for political support. I'll take allies wherever we find them, Elise replied pragmatically. The 3 stood in comfortable silence, watching the neighborhood transition from day to evening. Lights came on in homes and businesses. People walked dogs, children played in yards, neighbors chatted on porches. It's a beautiful community, Elise observed. It always was. It just needed people to see it, Walter nodded. Sometimes the most important thing we can do is simply see each other, really see each other, as human beings worthy of respect and dignity. And second chances, the chief added, glancing toward the door where Reynolds had exited earlier. Yes, Elise agreed. Those too. As darkness fell, the center's newly installed exterior lights illuminated the building, creating a welcoming beacon in the neighborhood. From the ugly incident on Oak Ridge Avenue, something meaningful had grown. Not just a building or a program, but a framework for healing and progress. Elise Montgomery, Billionaire CEO, had found an unexpected purpose beyond technology and business success. Walter Jenkins, retired judge, had found renewed meaning in his later years. And their community had found a path toward bridging divides T-T&D.